Ohayo! It's time for another recommendation! Today, one of my favorite MMORPGs ever, Wakfu. When I was younger, I had two big main obsessions, Pokemon and Ankama. Nothing was better than waking up and turning the TV at like 10 AM on a weekend and then watch an episode of Wakfu. Nothing was better except maybe Ankama's biggest hit game, Dofus. I was obsessed with Dofus at the time, and I fondly remember annoying my mom to get a sub to it like every few months. But then Ankama had a stroke of genius, and they came out with Wakfu, kind of out of nowhere. And I can tell you, I was hooked. I played during the beta, and I was so enchanted by how the game felt. It did change a lot over the years, but to me, it never quite lost its magic. Wakfu is the kind of game I shouldn't be allowed near to. I'll jump in for a while because, you know, life obligation, and then I'll come back crawling to it as soon as I hear a new cool update has dropped, which is what happened recently. I cannot stop playing it, and every time I come back, I get charmed by its atmosphere and its universe again. Which is why I'd like to talk about it today, and tell you why you should give it a try too. Wakfu is a game made by Ankama. Now, you might have no idea what Ankama is, which would be fair, especially if you're an English-speaking person, unless you've been watching me for a while. Then you've probably been forced to absorb the entirety of the Wakfu animated series at least 3 times, in which case, I'm not sorry. Ankama is a French company dedicated to creating video games, animated shows, comics, and a whole lot of other artistic medias. Their most well-known IP is of course Dofus, which I mentioned earlier, but Dofus also has a little brother, Wakfu. It's set in the same universe as the show I just mentioned. I know, not confusing at all. It's also set in the same universe as Dofus, and happens right after it. While Dofus works on a sub-payment model, kinda like Final Fantasy XIV, Wakfu is completely free to play. Now, I understand that this sentence may be setting alarms off in your head, kind of like as if you'd heard, "This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends." Look at me say that, and then one day I'll accept one of their sponsorship. But no, while there is of course a monetization aspect, it's absolutely not necessary. There is a massive amount of content to be enjoyed, and you absolutely won't be penalized for not paying, so don't worry. The game revolves, like most MMORPGs, around taking on dungeons and growing stronger by getting, you know, rare drops, better equipment, all of that, you're familiar with it. But I feel like the quests and the crafting elements are also really nicely fleshed out in this game, and they're definitely worth enjoying. And if you skip the story dialogue, you're dead to me. You'll start Wakfu by picking class between 18 of them, and that class will be your class for the rest of the game, unless you decide to create other characters, which you're free to do, and I actually would recommend doing it. I would recommend picking, you know, multiple class, getting them to level 50, and deciding then which class is best suited for you. All of them have their own gameplay, with some that are more oriented towards maybe long-distance fighting, healing, tanking, buffing, you know, all of that. There's even an invocator, the Osamoda, which is really cool. I really like the Osamoda. And you're free to upgrade your skill in a way that reflects how you want to play your class, because there are multiple ways to play them, so you're not stuck with one specific gameplay with one specific class. No class works the same way, and every time you create a new character, your game experience will be different. My personal favorite, which is also a really easy character to start out with because they don't have to strategize that much, is the SRAM. Mostly because I personally really like the dirty assassin moves kind of feel of its gameplay. I love to watch my enemies suffer as I keep teleporting to their back to literally kick them in the bosom. Speaking of, Wakfu's combat feels very unique. In a very standard fashion, you'll have to fight your way through a group of ads in a tile-based turn-by-turn combat, which is honestly already something you don't see often in MMORPGs. But to that end, you'll also have to strategize quite a lot. For example, the position in which you hit your enemy can change your damage output, you know, positional damage if you're familiar with the term. I also see you, Optimizer Kings. You're rubbing your hands while wondering if you can acquire exactly the stuff you want to keep pushing your limits and become the strongest in the game. Yes, you can. Rejoice. I will say it can be quite a conundrum to decide what to do. You have to manage where you put your skill points, what element or elements with an S you pick and you want to focus on, what equipment you should wear, etc, etc. Now, I understand that for my fellow casuals, this might seem very daunting, but do not worry. You can absolutely play the game and run the dungeons without fitting the meta or without being the most optimized person on Earth. The game will give you the time to learn how to be better at optimization for your skills, your equipment, should you wish to do so. On top of that, there are tons of guides on the internet that can help you understand your character a bit more. So no worries. Now you may get a little bit stuck at higher level if you decide that you don't want to strategize at all, but again, as a really, really massive casual gamer, I'm sure you can get through this. Now, let's talk about the game's dungeons. They're tons of fun, and they always have very clever or funny mechanics that you can learn during the fight. Another really neat mechanic in this game is that you can pick what level the dungeon will be at, which means that you won't have to give up on a dungeon that you like just because you're too high level for it. It will also adjust your rewards based on that level. There's also a system called modulation, and it lets you change your own level and scale it down if you'd like to not be over-leveled as well, which, again, will net you more reward. So this is a really cool system, and it does remind me again a bit of Final Fantasy XIV. I really like this. This means that even if a dungeon is very, very low level, you can still do it if you like the mechanic, you know, just because the dungeon is fun. And you won't be bored because you can be at the level of the dungeon, or you can make the dungeon harder. Wakfu's biggest strength, however, to me at least, isn't necessarily in its gameplay, but in its universe and art direction. The game is vibrant, colored, beautiful, and the lore is really interesting, with many mysteries to discover and puzzle pieces to put together. It also has their own humor, and specifically puns. So many puns. Send help. There is absolutely no way you'll get all the references. There are so many. And it's not just in a text. It's also in character's name, or sometimes even items appearances. Though I will say that if you are an English player, those do tend to be better in French than in English, since, you know, there are a little bit of localization issues with that. But, you know, still very enjoyable. Pixabay has always been really good at art direction and humor and these kind of things, and I really feel like Wakfu is one of their biggest wins. I really think that it's one of the most consistent and pretty games I've ever played. And you guys know how much I like pretty games, so this is a big praise. Honestly, it's really hard to talk about all the aspects of Wakfu. I feel like I've barely touched on the basics here by talking of all of this, and you can really tell that the video is way longer than usual already. I'm sure more strategy-oriented players could probably talk your ears off for hours on specific other stuff that I haven't mentioned, but I think it would be better for you to discover it. Wakfu is one of those games that just keeps on giving and that you really have to experience for yourself to understand. Now's the best time to get into it as well. They literally just released a new update in which they entirely reworked the tutorial section, which, by the way, you should absolutely do and not skip. It's really fun. Go do it. Don't skip it. This game is a masterpiece, and one of my favorite games ever, and that's why it's our recommendation of this week. I really hope this video convinced you to give it a try. It's a game I love from the bottom of my heart, and I'd love to see more people discover it and have more people to play with. Play with me! I am lonely! If you enjoyed the video, you know the deal. Leave a like, a comment, eventually subscribe, you know, it really helps you out, and it lets you see even more of these videos, so it's a net positive for you as well. If you like more game recommendations, I definitely invite you to watch this video. Yep, right there. You can click it. You can click on it. Yep.